Welcome to Spicy Family Scandals, where real-life drama meets hard-earned wisdom. Today's story is about betrayal, resilience, and the power of standing up for yourself. Let's dive in.
You'll never be good enough for this family, Emily. That's what Diane said to me last night, her voice slicing through the air like a dagger. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her words landed with the weight of every unspoken judgment she'd carried for the past 7 years of my marriage to her son. I was still replaying the moment in my head as I sat in my car outside their pristine colonial-style home, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I stared at the Christmas wreath on their door, the twinkling lights wrapping the porch railing, and I felt like I was about to drive straight into enemy territory. It wasn't the first time Diane had belittled me, but this was different. Last night wasn't just a comment about my weight or a snide remark about my mediocre career. Last night was an attack. A full-scale assault, in front of the entire family, designed to humiliate me and remind everyone at the table, including my husband, Mark, that I didn't belong. And here's the thing. I'm not the kind of woman who cries in the bathroom or quietly lets people walk all over me. Not anymore. I learned that lesson the hard way years ago, in a different life. Diane had no idea who she was dealing with. When I walked through that door tonight, I knew it was going to be war. But she didn't know the rules had changed. Let me back up a little. Last night started off as typical as any of Diane's family dinners. She set the tone the moment I arrived, greeting me with her perfectly manicured nails and a smile so sharp it could cut glass. "Emily," she said, drawing out my name like it was some sort of joke. "Oh, you look festive." Her eyes flicked over my dress, a deep burgundy wrap number I'd bought for the occasion. I'd been proud of it until that moment. Dinner was worse. Diane monopolized every conversation, as she always did, throwing subtle digs my way whenever she got the chance. But it wasn't until dessert that she really went for the jugular. "Mark," she began, her voice dripping with faux concern, "does Emily still bake those cookies you used to love? What were they called again?" "Oh, right, snickerdoodles. You used to be so slim, dear, before she got you hooked on sugar." Mark froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Mom, come on," he said, but Diane wasn't deterred. "I'm just saying," she continued, her voice sweet but her eyes full of venom. "It's important to keep up appearances, isn't it?
For the sake of the family."
A woman's looks are part of her responsibility. Wouldn't you agree, Emily? My stomach churned. I wanted to scream, to throw my wine in her face, to storm out and never come back. But instead, I just sat there, my cheeks burning, my throat tightening. I didn't say a word. And that was her mistake. Because while I may have looked defeated, inside, I was already planning my next move. Diane thought she'd won, but she was wrong.
So wrong.
I let her have her moment. I let her feel like the queen of her little castle, sitting at the head of the table, surrounded by her loyal subjects. And when I left that night, I didn't slam the door. I didn't cause a scene. But I did make a phone call. And tomorrow, Diane is going to learn what it feels like to be the one on the outside looking in. When I walked into Diane's house the next evening, everything looked picture perfect. The dining room table was already set with her fine china, candles flickering in their silver holders. Diane herself was stationed in the kitchen, barking orders at Mark's younger brother, Aaron, and his wife, Lisa. From the moment she saw me, her expression morphed into that same tight, insincere smile she always gave me. "Emily," she cooed, her voice dripping with condescension. "You came back. I wasn't sure you would after last night." I forced a polite smile, one I'd practiced in the mirror before leaving the house. "Why wouldn't I?" I asked lightly, walking past her and into the living room where the rest of the family was gathered. "It's always such a pleasure being here." She tilted her head, her sharp eyes scanning me for any sign of weakness. Diane thrived on intimidation, and I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of thinking she'd rattled me.
Not when I had so much planned.
The evening started quietly enough. Small talk about the weather, a few updates about Aaron and Lisa's kids. But Diane couldn't resist the temptation to stir the pot. "So, Emily," she said as we sat down to eat, her tone overly casual. "Mark tells me you've been thinking about a career change. Something a little less stressful, perhaps?" I glanced at Mark, who was staring down at his plate. He hadn't warned me she'd bring this up, but I wasn't surprised. Diane always made it a point to belittle my work, subtly suggesting that marketing wasn't a real profession. Yes, I have, I replied evenly, refusing to take the bait. I've been considering consulting. It's more flexible. Oh, flexible, Diane repeated, as though she'd just uncovered a secret code. I suppose that would give you more time to focus on other things. Like yourself, maybe? The table went silent. Even Aaron, who usually enjoyed watching Diane's antics, looked uncomfortable. Mark opened his mouth to say something, but I beat him to it. You're right, Diane, I said, my voice calm but firm. I've been focusing on myself. In fact, that's why I decided to take some time to really reflect on what's important to me, to reassess my priorities. Diane raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. Oh, and what conclusions have you come to, dear? I leaned forward slightly, meeting her gaze head-on. That I've been too forgiving, I said, letting the words hang in the air. Her expression faltered for just a moment before she recovered, laughing softly. Forgiving? Of what, exactly? I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I think you know. For the first time, Diane didn't have a quick retort. She glanced around the table, as if looking for an ally, but no one said a word. Mark was staring at me now, his brow furrowed in confusion, and I could tell he was starting to realize this wasn't going to be an ordinary dinner. And it wasn't, because as the meal went on, I started dropping little hints. A comment here, a loaded phrase there. I could see Diane growing increasingly uneasy, her mask of control slipping with every passing minute. She didn't know what I was up to, and that uncertainty was eating at her. By the time dessert was served, the tension was palpable. Diane's hands shook slightly as she poured herself a glass of wine, her eyes darting toward me every few seconds. So, Emily, she said finally, her voice tight. What exactly are you trying to say? I set down my fork and looked her square in the eye. You'll find out soon enough, I said softly, but there was steel in my voice. Diane didn't reply. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely unsettled. And I wasn't done yet. Not even close. After dinner, I excused myself and walked out onto Diane's back patio. The December air was crisp, biting at my cheeks, but it felt refreshing after the suffocating tension at the table. I needed a moment to regroup, to let the simmering anger inside me settle into something sharper, more calculated. Behind me, the sliding door opened. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Diane's perfume, a cloying mix of gardenia and something metallic, gave her away instantly. Emily, she said, her voice softer than usual. Too soft. Can we talk? I turned to face her, leaning casually against the patio railing. Of course, I said, though my tone left no doubt that I was prepared for whatever she had planned. She stepped closer, wrapping her cashmere cardigan around herself like armor. I hope you're not upset about what I said earlier. You know I only want what's best for Mark. There it was. The same excuse she'd been using for years to justify every insult, every backhanded comment. I'm not upset, I replied evenly, folding my arms. But I do think it's interesting that you always frame your criticism as concern. Diane's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Well, you've always been sensitive. I suppose it's just how you perceive things. Is that what you tell yourself? I asked, my voice calm, but with a razor edge. That I'm the problem? That I'm too sensitive to handle your constant put-downs? She blinked, momentarily thrown off guard. I don't know what you mean. Oh, I think you do, I said, taking a step closer. But don't worry, Diane. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to thank you. Her confusion was almost comical. Thank me? She echoed. Yes, I said, my voice unwavering. Because you've finally shown me exactly where I stand with this family. And now I know what needs to be done. Before she could respond, the door slid open again. Mark stepped onto the patio, his face etched with concern. What's going on? He asked, glancing between us. Nothing, Diane said quickly, her voice suddenly light and breezy. Just a little heart-to-heart. But Mark wasn't buying it. His eyes locked onto mine, silently asking for an explanation. And for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he was starting to see the cracks in his mother's perfect facade. Emily, he pressed. I took a deep breath, knowing this was a pivotal moment. I think it's time we all stop pretending, I said, my voice steady. Pretending that Diane's comments are harmless. Pretending that her concern isn't just a way to control everyone around her. Excuse me? Diane snapped, her voice sharper now. You heard me, I said, turning to face her fully. You've spent years trying to undermine me, Diane. But here's the thing, you didn't break me. You made me stronger.
Smarter.
And now I'm done playing nice. Mark looked stunned, his gaze darting between us. Diane, on the other hand, was livid. Her carefully curated mask of civility was slipping, and the real Diane, the one who thrived on manipulation and control, was finally showing through. What exactly are you planning to do, Emily? She demanded, her voice low and dangerous. I smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. You'll find out soon enough. With that, I turned and walked back inside, leaving Diane and Mark on the patio. My heart was pounding, adrenaline surging through me, but I felt more in control than I had in years. The truth was, I had no intention of fighting Diane on her terms. She could play her little games all she wanted, but I had something she didn't. The truth. And I wasn't afraid to use it. As I rejoined the family in the living room, I caught Aaron watching me, a curious expression on his face. Lisa, too, seemed unusually quiet, her eyes darting toward Diane as she and Mark returned from the patio. Good, I thought. Let them wonder. Let them start questioning everything. Diane had spent years building her image as the matriarch of this family, but she'd made one fatal mistake. She underestimated me. And tomorrow I was going to show her just how wrong she was. The morning after the dinner, I woke up early, despite barely sleeping. The adrenaline from the night before still coursed through my veins, but it wasn't enough to drown out the questions swirling in my mind. How had I let Diane's behavior go unchecked for so long? Why had I been so passive in the face of her constant attacks? And most importantly, what was I going to do now? Mark was still asleep when I slid out of bed and made my way to the kitchen. As I sipped my coffee, my phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Lisa. Emily, I know last night was tense, but I just wanted to say I'm on your side. Call me if you need to talk. I stared at the message, rereading it twice. Lisa had always been cordial to me, but we weren't exactly close. For her to reach out like this was unexpected, and it made me wonder. Had Diane's manipulations affected more than just me? I typed a quick reply, thanking her, then set my phone down. My plan was already in motion, but Lisa's message gave me an idea, a way to make sure I wasn't the only one who saw Diane for who she really was. By the time Mark stumbled into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes and looking groggy, I was already dressed and halfway through my second cup of coffee. Morning, he mumbled, leaning against the counter. You're up early. I glanced at him, my expression unreadable. Couldn't sleep. He hesitated, then sat across from me at the table. About last night, I raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. I didn't realize how bad things had gotten between you and my mom, he admitted, his voice heavy with guilt. I guess I've been blind to it. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness. Mark wasn't a bad man. He wasn't cruel or manipulative like Diane. But he'd spent his whole life under her thumb, and it showed in the way he avoided conflict, always choosing the path of least resistance. It's not just about last night, I said quietly. It's about years of comments, of feeling like I have to prove myself just to be treated with a shred of respect. And honestly, Mark, I'm done. He looked up at me, alarm flashing across his face.
Done?
What does that mean? I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. It means I'm not going to let her control our lives anymore. If you're willing to stand with me, great. But if not, I trailed off, letting the unspoken threat hang in the air. Mark's shoulders slumped, and I could see the conflict warring within him. I'll stand with you, he said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. What do you want me to do? Nothing, I said, standing up and grabbing my coat. Not yet. I left before he could ask any more questions. My first stop was Lisa and Aaron's house. When Lisa opened the door, she looked surprised to see me but quickly ushered me inside. Aaron was at work, and the kids were at school, leaving the two of us alone in the cozy living room. "What's going on?" Lisa asked, sitting across from me on the couch. "I need your help," I said bluntly. Her eyebrows shot up. "With what?" "Diane," I said, the name coming out like venom. "You've seen how she treats me. Last night wasn't an isolated incident. It's who she is. And I think it's time someone stood up to her." Lisa hesitated, glancing down at her hands. "I don't disagree," she said slowly. "But what can we do?
Diane.
She always gets her way." "Not this time," I said firmly. I pulled out my phone and showed her something I'd been holding onto for weeks. A voice memo recorded during one of Diane's particularly cruel tirades. It wasn't intentional at first. I'd been fiddling with my phone during a family gathering when her sharp words started flying. But when I realized how damning her words were, I'd hit record and let it run. Lisa's eyes widened as she listened to the recording. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Emily, this is bad." "For her, yes," I said, a cold smile spreading across my face. Lisa looked up at me, her expression a mix of shock and admiration. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" "Not a chance," I replied. By the time dinner rolled around that evening, everything was set. Mark was in the dark about my plan, which was intentional. He needed to hear this as much as anyone else. As we sat around Diane's table once again, I felt a strange sense of calm. Diane, on the other hand, was fidgety, her usual composure fraying at the edges. "So, Emily," she said finally, breaking the awkward silence. "Have you thought about our little talk last night?" "I have," I said, locking eyes with her. "In fact, I've been thinking a lot about this family, about what it means to belong here, to feel respected." Her eyes narrowed. And I realized something important," I said, pulling out my phone and setting it on the table. "Sometimes, people need to hear the truth. All of it." As I hit play on the recording, the room fell silent. Diane's voice filled the air, sharp and cutting, her words painting a picture of a woman who thrived on tearing others down. And for the first time, Diane didn't have a single word to say. The recording ended, leaving a silence so thick you could almost hear the crackling tension in the air. Diane's face went pale, her usual mask of smug superiority completely gone. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked genuinely caught off guard. The rest of the family sat frozen. Aaron stared at the phone as though it might explode, his jaw slack. Lisa's lips parted in disbelief. And Mark looked like someone had pulled the rug out from under him. "Emily," Diane started, her voice trembling slightly, but I cut her off. "No," I said firmly, my voice steady but low. "You don't get to twist this. Not this time." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came out. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me now, and for the first time, I didn't feel small under their scrutiny. I felt powerful. Mark finally found his voice. "What is this?" he asked, his tone sharp but tinged with confusion. "Where did that come from?" I turned to him, meeting his gaze head-on. "It's from a dinner we had here a few weeks ago," I said. I didn't plan to record it, but when Diane started in on me, like she always does, I thought it might be a good idea to have some proof. "Proof?" Diane hissed, her voice rising now. The icy composure was gone, replaced by something far uglier. "Proof of what? That I'm honest? That I don't sugarcoat things the way you want me to?" Lisa, who had been silent until now, spoke up, her voice shaky but resolute. "Diane, this isn't honesty. It's cruel. Do you even hear yourself in that recording? That's not how you talk to someone you care about." "Stay out of this, Lisa," Diane snapped, her sharp tones slicing through the air. But Lisa didn't back down.
"No."
"I've stayed out of it for too long," she said, her cheeks flushed. "I've watched you tear Emily down over and over, and I've kept quiet because I didn't want to rock the boat. But this is too far." Diane looked like she might combust, but before she could respond, Aaron chimed in. "Lisa's right," he said, his voice quieter but no less firm. "Mom, you've always been intense, but this isn't okay. The things you said in that recording, they're awful." Mark was still silent, his brow furrowed deeply. I could tell he was struggling to reconcile the woman in the recording with the image of his mother he'd held onto his entire life. "Mark," Diane turned to him now, desperation seeping into her voice. Are you really going to let them gang up on me like this? I'm your mother. Mark hesitated, his jaw tightening. I don't know what to say, he admitted finally, his voice strained. I knew you were hard on Emily, but hearing that? Mom, it's not right. Diane's face contorted, anger and panic warring for control. I have done everything for this family, she spat, her voice rising. I have sacrificed. I have worked to keep us together, and this is how you repay me? By siding with her? I felt a surge of anger at her words, but I kept my voice calm. This isn't about sides, Diane. It's about accountability. You've spent years tearing me down, making me feel like I wasn't good enough to be part of this family. But I am good enough. And I'm done letting you treat me like I'm not. She glared at me, her eyes blazing, but I didn't flinch. For the first time, I saw her for what she really was, a bully who thrived on control. And now, that control was slipping through her fingers. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Diane stood, pushing back her chair with a screech. If you're all so eager to turn on me, she said coldly, her voice trembling with barely contained fury, then maybe I should stop trying to hold this family together. With that, she stormed out of the dining room, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. The sound of a door slamming moments later signaled her retreat. For a few moments, no one spoke. Then Aaron let out a low whistle. Well, he said, leaning back in his chair. That was something. Mark was still staring at the table, his expression unreadable. I wanted to reach out to him, to reassure him, but I knew he needed time to process what had just happened. Lisa gave me a small, supportive smile. You were brave, she said quietly. I nodded, but I didn't feel brave. I felt exhausted. And yet, beneath the exhaustion, there was a sense of relief. For the first time in years, I had stood my ground. I had spoken my truth. But I knew this wasn't over. Diane wasn't the type to back down without a fight. And I had a feeling the real battle was just beginning. The following day, Diane's silence was louder than any argument she could have started. She didn't text, didn't call. But I knew her well enough to recognize that this wasn't retreat, it was strategy. Diane wasn't the type to lick her wounds quietly. She was plotting. Mark had been distant all morning, pacing the living room while avoiding eye contact with me. I could tell he was struggling to reconcile the woman who raised him with the person everyone else saw at that dinner table. Finally, as I folded laundry in the bedroom, he walked in, leaning against the doorframe with a heavy sigh. I don't know how we come back from this, he said quietly. I folded another shirt, keeping my hands busy to steady myself. I don't think it's about coming back, I said. It's about moving forward. And that starts with honesty. He shook his head, running a hand through his hair. You don't know what it's like, Emily. She's always been like this, always controlling, always difficult. But she's still my mom. How am I supposed to just turn my back on her? I looked up at him, my heart aching at the pain in his voice. I'm not asking you to turn your back on her, I said gently. I'm asking you to stand up for us. For me. Because if you don't, she's going to keep tearing us apart. He didn't respond, and the silence between us felt heavier than ever. That evening, the storm finally came. Diane called Mark's phone, and when he didn't answer, she called mine. I stared at the screen for a moment, debating whether to let it go to voicemail, but something inside me told me this was it, the confrontation I'd been bracing for. Hello. I answered, my voice calm but firm. Emily, Diane said, her tone clipped. We need to talk. Now. I agree, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Good, she snapped. Because I've had just about enough of this nonsense. You think you can waltz into my family and turn everyone against me? Think again. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Diane, this isn't about turning anyone against you. It's about holding you accountable for the way you've treated me and everyone else. Everyone else? She scoffed. Don't be ridiculous. Aaron and Lisa adore me. I couldn't help but let out a short, humorless laugh. Did you even notice Lisa standing up for me last night? Or Aaron calling you out? They're tired of walking on eggshells around you, Diane. We all are. There was a pause, and for a moment, I thought I might have gotten through to her. But then she spoke again, her voice low and venomous. You've made a mistake, Emily, she said. A big one. Do you think Mark will choose you over me? Over his mother? You're nothing without this family. Her words hit like a slap, but I refused to let her see the impact. You're wrong, I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. I'm not nothing. And this family isn't your kingdom to rule. It's time you let go of the control you think you have. She let out a bitter laugh. You have no idea what you've started, do you? Maybe not, I admitted. But I know this. I'm not afraid of you anymore. I hung up before she could respond, my hands trembling as I set the phone down. When I walked into the living room, Mark was sitting on the couch, staring at his phone. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. She called you, didn't she? He asked. I nodded. She's not happy. He let out a humorless laugh. When is she ever? For the first time all day, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Resolve. What did she say? She thinks you'll choose her over me, I said, my voice soft but firm. And, honestly, Mark, I need to know if she's right. His eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, I worried I'd pushed too hard. But then he stood, crossing the room to stand in front of me. She's not right, he said, his voice steady. I don't know what it's going to take to fix this, but I do know one thing. I'm choosing us. The weight I'd been carrying for years seemed to lift just a little. It wasn't a perfect resolution. It wouldn't be until Diane truly faced the consequences of her actions. But it was a start. And as Mark wrapped his arms around me, I allowed myself a moment of hope. The final confrontation came faster than I expected. Diane didn't let Mark's decision, or mine, sit quietly. The very next evening, she arrived unannounced at our house, her sharp knock echoing through the living room like a war drum. Mark and I exchanged a glance. He hesitated, but I didn't. This wasn't a time to hide or avoid. It was time to end this once and for all. When I opened the door, Diane stood there, her coat wrapped tightly around her like a shield against the cold. Her eyes were blazing, but there was something else in her expression too, a flicker of desperation. Can I come in? She asked, her voice tight. I stepped aside, letting her in without a word. Mark followed me to the living room, his face pale but determined. Diane walked in like she owned the place, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She wasted no time. This nonsense ends now, she said, spinning to face me. I won't allow you to poison my son against me. I'm not poisoning anyone, I said calmly, meeting her fiery gaze with a steady one. Mark made his own choice. And honestly, Diane, if you keep pushing him, you're only going to push him further away. Mark shifted beside me, his jaw tightening. Mom, stop, he said, his voice low but firm. This isn't Emily's fault. It's yours. You've been tearing her down for years, and I let it happen. That's on me. But this? Coming here and trying to strong-arm her? That's on you. Diane's face twisted, her composure cracking. Mark, you don't understand. I've done everything for you, for this family. And she's turning you against me. No, Mom, he said, stepping forward. She's just standing up for herself. And I'm finally seeing you for who you really are. Her eyes darted between us, her breathing quickening. For a moment, I thought she might cry, but then she straightened, her mask snapping back into place. You think you can survive without me? She hissed, her voice icy. Without my help, my influence, my connections? You'll regret this, Mark. Both of you will. Mark didn't flinch. Maybe, he said quietly, but I'd rather build something real with Emily than keep living under your thumb. The room went still. Diane's face hardened, and I could see her weighing her next move. Finally, she let out a bitter laugh. You think this is over? She said, her voice dripping with venom. It's not. You'll come crawling back to me, both of you. Just wait. She turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. For a few minutes after she left, the house was silent. Mark sat on the couch, his head in his hands, while I leaned against the wall, trying to process what had just happened. Do you think she meant it? Mark asked finally, his voice muffled. I sat beside him, placing a hand on his back. Probably, I admitted. But it doesn't matter. What matters is us. Our marriage. Our future. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and relief. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it, he said. I smiled softly. You saw it when it counted. Over the next few weeks, Diane made good on her promise to escalate the situation. She tried everything, calling family members to spin the story in her favor, sending passive-aggressive texts to Mark, even showing up uninvited at Aaron and Lisa's house to air her grievances. But something incredible happened. Slowly but surely, people began to see through her. Aaron and Lisa stopped indulging her rants. Even Mark's cousins, who usually stayed out of the drama, started reaching out to me with words of support. For the first time, Diane wasn't in control. The turning point came when Mark decided to set firm boundaries. He sent Diane a carefully worded message, making it clear that unless she was willing to apologize and change her behavior, she wouldn't be welcome in our lives. It wasn't easy for him. It broke his heart, I could tell, but it was necessary. At first, she didn't respond. Days turned into weeks, and for a while, it felt like the silence might stretch on forever. But then, one evening, Mark's phone buzzed with a message. From Diane, I need time to think. I'll reach out when I'm ready. It wasn't an apology. Not yet. But it was a crack in her armor. Months later, as Mark and I sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The battle with Diane had been brutal, but it had also been transformative. I had learned to stand my ground, to demand respect, and to prioritize my own well-being. And Mark had grown too, stepping out from his mother's shadow to build something real with me. The scars of Diane's manipulation were still there, but they no longer defined us. We had chosen each other, and that choice had made us stronger. As the last rays of sunlight faded, Mark reached over and took my hand. No matter what happens, he said, we're a team. Always. And for the first time, I truly believed him.